talk today about how we use storytelling in our work. And as you can see, we've got some special guests here on our regular Trend Tuesday Live, where we talk about the now, the new, the next in careers. So today we have Louise Kurzmark and Deb Dibb with us. And thank you, ladies, for joining us. So much fun.
It is fun.
It is fun.
Yeah. So I know both of you have heard some of the pitter patter about. I feel like we get it on both ends. Well, you can't do storytelling because you lose people or whatever the objections are. And then we hear you got to use storytelling because that's the way to stand out from all the chat GPT content and everything that's going on there. So we're going to address both ends of those spectrums today. And Deb, you have been teaching storytelling for a long time. You're a master at this as well as Louise. And tell us a little bit about why storytelling is so important when we think about helping our clients stand out.
Oh, wow. Because, excuse me, a little cold today. We want to stand out, obviously. We want our clients to stand out. But the tendency for everyone is to try to be like everybody else because that's what they think they should be, professional. And the thing that really is something that people don't tap into is the power of emotion because we think emotion doesn't belong in the workplace. Well, emotion is the superpower that pulls everything together cohesively, community-wise, everything is really driven by emotion. You've always heard the phrase like hires like, etc. Well, if people don't know who you are, how are they going to know if they like you, if they want to hire you? Stories really help with that. And when we talk about stories, we're not talking about Goldilocks, fairy tales, whatever, fun, lovely novels. We're talking about strategic storytelling with the object of getting our value across, but not just our value, our personality, our humanity, the things that we look for online when we try to find other people's kind of je ne sais quoi, that thing that sets people apart, that sets influencers apart and all that stuff. People love backstory. People want to know more about people when we're online. So how does that all work? It's really all about neuroscience. And over the last numbers of years, scientists have found that different parts of the brain react to different things. But emotion is something that really pushes our brain to do its best in terms of remembering and connecting. So when we think about your typical bulleted resume, even if it's written by a phenomenally good writer, strategist, brand person, whatever, a list of facts is never going to be as memorable as a story. And if you can weave a story into those bullets, that'd be fantastic. And that's one of the things that we teach. But the reason that it works is because facts light up only 2 areas of the brain, and emotion lights up 5, 3 more than the 2 fact areas. And so emotion is what powers recall, what powers the sense of wanting to connect, the sense of like hires like, etc. So that is really what is really the backbone of storytelling. Sam
Yeah,
Bloom,
so there's the
who I
first
adore,
key,
talks
right?
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, the first key is that emotion triggers that remembrance, it triggers that likability. And so, put that in the comments for the people that are just breezing by later. Emotion is what triggers that and it makes that connection. So then Louise, you take that to the next step, which is really about strategy because we've got the emotion, but as Deb said earlier, this isn't about fun, fluffy stories. It's really about strategy. So how do we turn these stories into that strategy?
And I think this is something that we as career professionals bring to this whole challenge much more so than people who just think, oh, I need to add some stories to my profile or to my cover letter or to my resume, because we know that this is all done with a purpose, right? The purpose is to advance your career, to get a job, to position yourself for something, to present yourself in a certain way with certain skills and abilities. And the stories can help us to do that, but we always have to be remembering what that goal is so that the story is used in aid of the goal, and it becomes evidence of the abilities that we want to communicate, but in a way that is much more interesting, much more memorable, as Deb just mentioned. And I have just a kind of a little story about that recently is, Deb, you recently referred a client to me because you couldn't take him on at the time. And we had used his materials in our storytelling class. And when I was on the phone with him, or on Zoom actually, I felt like I knew him. I had never met him, but I knew him. I was able to connect with him. I was able to reference some of the stories that he had used in your prior materials. We got on famously. Now my style is not the same as your style, but I was able to weave it in. And just because I had read his stories and I knew him so much better than if I had just read his resume or, a cold recitation of facts. So I was astonished. I shouldn't be, but I was, at how much of a difference it made on my end, the receiving end, when normally I'm on the giving end where I'm creating the material. Now I had received it. So it was fascinating. But because the stories are told with a purpose, they do advance the client's interests, and they're not just to be memorable. Really, they are to be valuable, is really what we're trying to communicate with the stories in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and that makes it a challenge because everybody's got stories, but what stories do we tell? And what parts of those stories matter? And the context and the details that we choose, there's a strategy behind all of that to, as you're saying, kind of put the stories to work, right? We got to put the stories to work. And that only happens when we have a strategy behind what we choose, what stories we choose, what context we choose, and then the details that are put into the story. So one of our viewers said here, emotion recall, yes, stories help with that, all with the purpose of positioning yourself. And then we'll say hello to Valerie. Hi, Valerie. Thanks for joining us here today. Yay. Now, we know that we can't put the entire story into the resume, right? You can't put the entire story even into LinkedIn. So, Deb, tell us a little bit about how we create what we call story seeds.
Yeah, so we can tell stories, but we can't tell every story, as you said. So one of the goals that we have, and story seeds, I must give Louise full credit for that phrase, because when we first started teaching it, she talked about, it's hard to get full stories into a resume, even into a LinkedIn profile when you have a lot more room than you would have someplace else, or even a bio. But if you sow the seeds of that story, get a sense of things to come, and give enough context. Context is a huge part of storytelling, so that someone becomes fascinated by the thought of learning more. The thing is, they won't be fascinated if it doesn't have value to them. So in personal branding, we always talk about, you don't want to put yourself out there to look for people you want to know. You put yourself out there to find the people who need to know you. So they need to know you. Why? Because you have whatever that magical combination of things is that they need. And it's typically not just a skill set. It's typically the entire package of you, your process, what you deliver, how you deliver it, how do you work with people, all of those things that are in some ways soft skills, besides the value pieces of what your accomplishments are. Stories really help to show those, and the story seeds help to show those bits of personality, personal brand, all those things that kind of feel amorphous in some ways become much more relatable and much more understandable in a story. And those story seeds, that little bit of sense of what's to come, is absolutely just magic for your brain.
Yeah. Well, and it's that opportunity to, as you said, set the context. And I know we talk about star stories, and it's really about that context. And I always give the very simple example that if you say someone achieved 100% quota, it's like humdrum, right? Everybody does that. You can't really be a salesperson if you can't. But if you tell me that you achieved 100% quota when the market was in a free fall, and if you have some numbers around that, even better. But it's just that little bit of context. And then, as you said earlier, it's also how the person does it and who they are. And if we can use just a little tiny phrase to talk about how they did that, now we've got the context, we've got the personality, and that brings the achievement to life. And so if either of you have some other examples that you'd share, feel free to jump in with those as well.
Well, I do want to add one thing, and that is that the stories, when used in a resume in much more brief form, and then in LinkedIn, and then in interviews, they create a huge amount of consistency. So the client, the job seeker, our client, comes across as authentic and consistent in every one of these different means of communicating. And I think that is so important. So the stories need to come from them. We're not making them up, right? And they might need some coaching on when and how to introduce a story, but once they understand the power of it, they usually are very much on board with it, and understand how it positions them differently from everybody else, and in a really powerful way. Someone asked about giving an example of a story seed. So it might be that you're trying to communicate a certain characteristic of the person, someone who's a really take charge, in a crisis. And you might mention in the resume something about crisis management. And then in LinkedIn, you talk about how they handled a particular crisis. So you kind of plant the idea of what they're like, and then you illustrate it in LinkedIn or in an interview message, so that it's just getting that idea across. I'll think about maybe some better examples.
Well, and so this
if
is
I
one
could
of
jump
Louise's
in, oh, I'm sorry.
one of Louise's
Go ahead.
examples from the class, actually.
Oh, there we go.
And it's just a headline, and it says Olympic athlete to CPMG consultant to sommelier and wine educator. That's a story seed. You want to think, how did this person go from being an Olympic athlete to being a consultant to now being a wine educator? And so little phrases, little headlines, as we were talking about before, even a descriptor, all of those can be tiny story seeds that then we want to know more. We want to read more.
Good. I'm glad I came up with
Exactly.
that great example that I had forgotten about.
Because you know what? They grow from the little seed in the resume to the LinkedIn profile, which is bigger, or maybe in between they're in a car story, and then they're in a LinkedIn story, and then they're in an interview story, and then they're in a wider ranging, third or fourth round interview story. But the genesis was that seed, and that consistency, as Louise says, which is so important to be on brand and deliver what people expect good brands to deliver.
Excellent. Yeah. And I know that we've been talking a little bit about how, and some of our listeners today, I see Helen joining us, and this person that took the class more recently, the storyteller class, lit my fire. Oh, that's why we love teaching this class, because it takes it to a whole nother level. But one of the things that we've been talking about with this, Louise, is that it levels the playing field, because you've written some amazing documents for new graduates all the way up to a CEO, and they all can use storytelling.
Yes, that is absolutely true. And I came across a phrase. I have to give credit to Kathy Lanzalaka, who uses it on her resumes. She uses it for new graduates. She calls it experience takeaways, which I think is brilliant. And then she writes a little thing about what they learned from that experience. And if you're working with new graduates, they typically don't have a lot of relevant professional experience. They're new graduates, they're in the entry level roles, but they have done things. They've done class projects, or they've done internship or co-op. And sometimes even those experiences are not hands-on, real in the work that they're going to be doing, but they're valuable learning experiences. So when she uses that phrase, and they talk about how the person learned to work, as part of a team, or learn to take responsibility for mistakes, or something, was a personal growth experience, whatever might have happened in that internship or co-op or project, it makes them human. It makes them, it shows how they respond to adversity, or how they deal with life and work and the things that go on, and not just the hard facts and the things that they learned in their program or on their work. So I think that's a really great strategy for new graduates also, who often think they don't have any experience. They think they don't really know anything. They're unsure of themselves. So when you can prep them with the story and explain and show them how it illustrates their skills, they're going to gain confidence, which is really going to help them in the interviews. And I think that extracting the story from the client is the fun part, because it lets them just talk about things. They're not trying to, rattle off facts for you to write their resume. They're just talking about how they solved a problem, or what they learned from something, or, an experience that changed their life, maybe in their childhood, why they chose their career path. All these different areas can be the grounds for gaining the stories that really, really set them apart and make them memorable.
Yeah, it's one of the things I love about storytelling, about branding, is that everybody can engage in the process, and then you're just communicating how it's relevant. I mean, it can't just be this, oh, cool story about me, right? It has to be that piece that really connects to what the employers care about, or why the employers would jump in. And so Ken brought this up. Of course, Ken is always promoting the storytelling aspect in video. And Ken, I love this, and we do see more people creating video. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily great video for their brand, and so we added that to the storytelling class last time, or the time before. We taught it. How do career professionals help candidates come up with some videos that make sense and that are interesting, but also relevant and on target? Because I do think video is a powerful tool, and actually young people are probably more likely to use it, but not necessarily in a strategic way. And that's where we want to help them combine their storytelling, which they might already be doing organically, with the strategy of their career and their career progression. Anything else you two would say about the video piece?
Well, I'd say it's still part of that whole consistency that we're looking for. So the person is consistent in their on paper or online message. They're consistent in video, and video helps someone get to know them even more. So what they meet, when they meet in person or on a video interview or whatever, they still seem like the person that they have kind of met, even though they haven't met them in person all along. And so that's really important, because the thing with branding is when there's any inconsistency, things get muddy right away. And branding is built on trust, that trust in that promise, as we say, of value. And so consistency is critical.
And also, if job seekers, particularly young people, but not necessarily, can practice their stories and videotape themselves before they actually share it with anyone, they become more fluent in telling the story. They can critique themselves. They can use AI tools like Udly. I think is really a brilliant one to critique what they're saying and doing, and get some feedback on it. And then once they do start the interview process, they're going to be so much more confident and comfortable telling the story, because they know that, this worked, this was good when I did it on my video. So I think that's a really good tool for people to use. So Ken, yes, we support that. Absolutely.
Yes. And that we as career professionals can help people with that crafting of their story. We don't want it to be necessarily a video resume, right? Where it goes through, first I did this and then I did that. Nobody's going to engage with that. And so the storytelling piece of that is really important. And I just had the link up there. So we are starting our Academy Certified Career Storyteller class in November 1st. So it seems like a long ways away, but it's not. And this is our advanced class for writers who want to work storytelling into their resumes, their profiles, their bios. We talk about helping people with interview prep as well, a little bit in the storytelling, networking resumes, videos. So it's all about how do you work someone's story into all of those pieces. And we've been teaching that, for 5 years, maybe? And it's just a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Has it been that long?
I know.
Time flies.
And always bringing in something new. So I think the latest thing we brought in was the video piece. But you might say, well, can't ChatGPT help my clients with their writing? And I'm a big fan of using ChatGPT in your writing. And if you missed our last session on how you can use ChatGPT in your writing, let me know. I'll send you the link, and I'm happy to give that to you. But the challenge is in this type of writing, especially in career writing, is that you can't use fictional stories. So ChatGPT writes fictional stories. Marketers are using it, right? It could write a kind of fictional account of a customer or a customer problem. That's great. You can bring that emotion in because it's got a lot of data to pull on. The challenge for your career is that it can't write your stories. So what we talk about when we talk about using ChatGPT is that it can help you figure out which stories to tell, which is the strategy part we were talking about, looking at the job description, looking at the customer's pains. Super excited about all of the things that we can do with it to better understand our end user, our hiring manager. I mean, you've got all this data, and now ChatGPT can tell you what they care about, what their pains are, all of those things. But you're still going to have to tell the stories that connect with what you did, what you've done, that can you use in your resume or your LinkedIn profile. There's ways where you can use ChatGPT on the back end to maybe kind of hone the story, perfect the story. But when it comes right down to it, that's why stories will persist and maybe even become more important, is because you will be unique and distinguished because you tell your story. Right.
And also, I think that we can help our clients. They'll tell the story, they'll come up with the story, and then we can guide them into why that's a good story or not a good story, or kind of tease out why are we telling the story, what's the purpose, so that the purpose is coming across very strongly in what they're saying. It's not, because all stories can benefit from editing. And our job might be to help them edit it so that it's powerful and relevant, and as well as authentic. So that I don't know that artificial intelligence can do that. I assume at some point will be irrelevant, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, well, and it's that you do have to tell your own story. Even if you're going to use artificial intelligence, the story has to be somewhere for it to pull from or make it up from your resume. And that's the part that I've found most people struggle with, is getting the story out. And then, of course, writing it is the next step.
Exactly.
Yeah. And there's a phrase that a cluster of words that we use when we're teaching this, right? It's narrate, educate, fascinate, and activate. And that's really the process. Most of the time we try to educate. That's our list of facts. That's our skill set. But that alone doesn't work. AI can give you that in a heartbeat, but without the context, nothing's there. Without the personality, nothing's there. You're not hitting those emotional pieces that make it so connective. And one of the things that Sam Horn talks about is stories are proof of concept. And the better your story is, the more believable your your uh, your your achievement becomes, right? Because it's not just a factual piece of information. It's, this is where we were, this is what happened, this is how we got everybody together, this is the challenges we faced along the way, these are the things that happened when it started working, these are the things that happened down the line when it started working, this is what we talked about when we were doing this. And Sam Horn talks about even putting dialogue in your stories to make it feel even more real. She talks about basically factual stuff is above the neck rhetoric. And she talks about stories as proof of concept. And I really love the way that rings.
Yeah, I love that. Narrate, educate, fascinate, and then activate is the piece of it really important for our career, although even for marketing, right? What is someone going to do after they read that story? If you've told a good story and you've told a story that hits a pain, they'll want to call you, right? I need to hire this VP to come in and turn around my division because I've got this story of how they did it before. And that's where the strategy piece comes in, is telling a story isn't powerful unless it actually connects to your audience and their pain points and what they really want to hear about. I do want to just say that so Deb and Louise and I did a session on getting storytelling into your LinkedIn profile a few years ago. And if you haven't taken that yet, I know many of you probably already have on here, but if you haven't taken that storytelling on LinkedIn session, drop me a message in whatever system you're in, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever. and I will send you a discount code to get that session. It's like a little preview of the class, but it's also very powerful in terms of writing headlines, the entry piece of that about section, the experience section, which I still see a lot of people just copying and pasting from a resume. So if you want to take your LinkedIn game to the next level, drop me a message and I'll send you the link to get that little preview. It's 2 hours. It's not little, but that preview of the longer course. Excellent. So storytelling, Louise, just one thought for our listeners who are mostly writers and coaches here. Where should they start if they're wanting to get more storytelling into their work?
Well, you have to get the stories first. So that starts with your process of getting information from clients. I use two primary ways to get stories. One is I have a worksheet that I've developed that asks them certain questions, and then I have a consultation that goes deeper into certain areas. But I really like using the worksheet, not just the consult, because there I have the client's own language, and that helps me when I'm writing. And then the other thing is think of using the stories, particularly for LinkedIn, as so much more fun and interesting than writing a resume, because we are writers. We get into this structured way of putting together a great resume. No criticism of that. But all of a sudden we are freed from the shackles of the resume, and we can write the story, and then we can edit the story and make sure that it's hitting the right points. So you look at it as an opportunity to express your creativity and have fun with it, because it is more fun. It's just, and it's different. So I think that if you look at it as a plus and not an extra chore, it will be, much more enjoyable.
Right. And when you ask those questions that really get your client stories, it can be easier, because instead of you trying to manufacture language, you're using their language, their stories, and it can be easier than the way we're used to trying to put it in resume lingo, which I know, Deb, you have your own term for that.
Corporate speak.
Yes, get rid of the corporate speak.
Don't love corporate speak.
What tip would you give to folks?
I think what Louise said, number one, about pulling the stories out of them is fantastic, and encouraging them to talk about themselves, because most people are reluctant to do that, right up to senior executives who you would think would be love to brag on themselves. Typically the really good ones don't. So just saying, you know what, here's the safe space. I want you to brag to me. I really want you to tell me all this great stuff that happened and that really had everything to do with you. You don't have to be shy. Tell me all about it. If you already know what their goal is, whether the company they want to work for, the type of a position they want, which hopefully we do know before we start working with them, we're already used to looking for those light bulb moments, right? That like, wait a minute, let me get that down. Those are your clues. Those are your clues. And when you think about also what, if you do interview coaching, or even if you send them on their way with their resume with some ideas for interview, those stories that they would be elaborating on for the interview are the stories that you can start in the resume, flesh out more in LinkedIn, and then, as we talked about before, they can become full-fledged conversations in an interview. And as Louise said, they're fun. It's so much more interesting, and the clients become so much more engaged as long as it is strategic and focused on value. That's truly the most important part. It's not a narcissistic endeavor. That is never going to work.
Right. Because people can see through that. When they can't see, why does this story matter to me? Then they tune out. And then Ken said, how long should stories be? And you kind of went through that. It really depends on the medium. Right? If you're writing it in a resume, it might be a line and a half on a bullet. And you really got to pick what parts of the context matter, which one little phrase is going to give some personality for my client. In the LinkedIn profile, we might get 2 or 3 lines, or maybe a couple short paragraphs, depending on how many stories we have for an experience section. And boy, I love that, in the experience section, that you can just elaborate on that story just a little bit more there. And then in an interview, obviously, it might be 60 to 90 seconds that they're telling that story, or maybe even a little bit longer, depending on what it sounds like. But yeah, Rhonda, jumping in.
And in a video as well.
Right.
Yeah.
You could do a video on a story. You know, you could do an intro video, but then you can do different videos on different stories. You can have a whole story library that you have prepared already on paper, on video that you pull from for different circumstances. And that's one of the ways that we can come in and help our clients be really prepared and confident.
Yes, excellent. Well, I really appreciate all of you in the comments. It's so fun to hear from so many of you. Watch your
Yeah.
messages. I'll drop you the link for that preview, and you know, put November 1st on your calendar. We'll send you updates, but that November 1st is when our class starts, and you'll get a chance to write. We are a writing academy, so you'll get a chance to write and get feedback. I mean, Deb and Louise like pour their hearts out into these. And one of our previous students said that it was better than her master's degree in writing and journalism, actually. So I just think that that says a lot to the effort that Deb and Louise put into grading your assignments. So I look forward to seeing you all next week. So next week, actually, we won't be here live because we're going to do another webinar session so I can go through using ChatGPT for career decision-making and exploration, which I'm super excited about. So watch your email for the link for next week so you can join me on, it won't be Zoom, it's a different webinar platform, but then we'll be back for our Trend Tuesday lives the week after that. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Deb and Louise. It was always fun to see you.
You're welcome.
Great to see
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.